I never believed in the kind of love they write songs about, not because I was cynical exactly. More because I had grown up watching love fail in slow motion, my parents sleeping in separate rooms by the time I was 12, speaking to each other only in polite, hollow sentences that sounded rehearsed. My older sister falling apart after a breakup that left her crying on the bathroom floor for 3 weeks. My best friend in high school confessing feelings to someone she adored, only to be laughed at in front of half the school. Love, as far as I could tell, was something that looked beautiful from a distance and hurt terribly up close. My name is Zara Hussein. I was 24 years old when I moved to Edinburgh for a postgraduate degree in literature, carrying 2 suitcases, a box of books too heavy to be practical, and absolutely no expectation that anything extraordinary was about to happen to me. I had been privately gay since I was about 16. Quietly being the important word. My family was loving but traditional, my community was small and interconnected, and I had spent years keeping that particular truth folded up inside me like a letter I wasn't ready to send. I had told exactly 3 people: my sister Nadia, my university friend Priya, and a therapist named Dr. Chun whom I'd seen for 8 months during my undergraduate years. None of them had reacted badly. All of them had hugged me. Still, the habit of quietness had become part of me. A second skin I wore so naturally, I sometimes forgot it was there. Edinburgh welcomed me with rain. Not dramatic, cinematic rain, just the persistent, gray, slightly aggressive drizzle that, I would later learn, was simply the city's default setting for approximately 9 months of the year. I arrived at my new flat on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, hauled my impossibly heavy book box up 3 flights of stairs, and stood in my small room looking out at the gray rooftops and feeling something I can only describe as terrifyingly free. No one here knew me. I could be any version of Zara I wanted. I didn't know yet what that meant. My postgraduate program was small, only 14 students in the department, which meant we were all crammed together in seminars, constantly bumping into each other in the narrow departmental corridor, sharing the same 2 photocopiers and the same battered coffee machine that produced something technically describable as espresso. I met most of my cohort at an orientation session on my second day. People were warm, nervous, enthusiastic in the way that graduate students tend to be at the beginning, full of ideas they were eager to share, full of the particular energy that comes from having chosen to spend another year or 2 or 3 submerged in books and ideas. I liked most of them immediately, and then there was Elliot. Dr. Elliot Voss was not a student. She was a third-year PhD candidate, who was also serving as a teaching assistant for the core module all of us first years were required to take. She was introduced to us briefly at the end of the orientation session by the module convener, Professor Harrington, who gestured toward her with the vague fondness of someone pointing out a very competent piece of furniture. "And this is Elliot, who'll be leading your Thursday seminars," Professor Harrington said. "She's excellent. Pay attention to what she says." Elliot gave the room a single, sweeping look that managed to be both professional and utterly disinterested, said, "See you Thursday," and left. I watched her go. She was tall, nearly a head taller than me, which wasn't difficult since I stood at 5'3" with dark auburn hair cut in a sharp, practical way that was somehow also effortlessly stylish. She wore all black, not in a dramatic, trying to make a statement way, just in the way that some people wear black the way others wear air, as though it had never occurred to them to do otherwise. She had a long, angular face with a jaw that looked like it had been designed specifically to appear unimpressed, and dark green eyes that I noticed from across the room and immediately stopped thinking about, because noticing things like that about people you've just met in a professional context seemed inadvisable. I told myself she seemed fine, competent, professional. Thursday. Arrived. Our seminar room was small and overheated, with tall windows overlooking a cobblestoned courtyard. There were 8 of us in the group, arranged around a rectangular table, and we waited with varying degrees of composure for our seminar leader to arrive. She was 3 minutes late. She walked in without apologizing for it, set her bag down, looked around the table and said, "Right, everyone's read The Wolf?" Half the hands went up. A few people made apologetic gestures, murmuring about the edition being hard to find or the library holding being checked out. Elliot looked at the non-raisers with an expression of such calm, concentrated neutrality that it was somehow worse than outright disapproval. "Interesting," she said. And then she proceeded to conduct the seminar entirely as though everyone had done the reading, which meant that those who hadn't were left scrambling to follow a discussion that moved fast and expected everyone to keep up. I had done the reading. I had done all of the reading plus additional secondary sources. Because that was simply the kind of person I was, the kind who over-prepared as a way of managing anxiety. Toward the end of the seminar, I made a point about interiority and Mrs. Dalloway that I'd been turning over in my mind since. The previous night, something about the way Woolf uses the permeability of consciousness to suggest that identity is fundamentally relational rather than fixed. There was a small silence when I finished. Then Elliot said, "That's not entirely wrong," and moved on. I stared at my notebook. Not entirely wrong. After a 3-minute analysis, I had spent considerable mental energy constructing. The person sitting beside me, a cheerful Scottish student named Finn, who would become one of my closest friends, leaned over and whispered, "That's basically high praise from her." Last semester, she told someone their entire dissertation proposal was built on a category error. I did not find this as comforting as Finn clearly intended it to be. Over the following weeks, I developed what I can only describe as a complicated relationship with Thursday seminars. I looked forward to them with an intensity that I chose not to examine too carefully, and I left them feeling alternately energized and deflated. Elliot ran the seminars brilliantly. There was no other word for it. She had a way of asking questions that didn't feel like questions at all, more like small, precise provocations that made you think harder than you planned to. She pushed back on lazy arguments with a precision that was almost surgical. She remembered everything everyone said and connected it to things said 3 weeks earlier in ways that made the whole semester feel like one long, unfolding conversation. She was, without question, the most intellectually engaging person I had encountered in an academic setting. She was also cold, not cold in the way of someone who hasn't noticed you're there. That might have been bearable. She was cold in the pointed, specific way of someone who has noticed and has decided you don't particularly merit warmth. She remembered my name, she remembered everyone's names, but she rarely addressed me directly. And when she did, there was a quality to her attention that felt more like assessment than engagement. Like I was a text she was evaluating rather than a person she was speaking to. Once, in week 4, I submitted a response paper that I had worked on very hard, revising it 3 times, reading it aloud to myself to catch any awkward phrasing, genuinely caring about whether the argument was airtight. She handed them back the following Thursday with brief written comments. Most people's papers had 2 or 3 lines. Mine had half a page. I thought this was a good sign. The comments were meticulous, specific, and relentlessly critical. Not cruel, they weren't cruel. Every point she made was intellectually valid. But there was not a single note of encouragement. Not one word acknowledging what worked before diving into what didn't. Not even the formulaic good start that most academics deployed as a social lubricant before launching into critique. Just, here is what is weak. Here is why, here is what you should have done instead. I read it twice on the bus home. I felt something hot and embarrassing behind my eyes that I refused to allow to become actual tears on a public bus in Edinburgh. That night, I told Finn about it over bad wine in his flat. He made sympathetic noises and refilled my glass and said, "She's like that with everyone, Zara. It's not personal." "It feels personal," I said. "That's because she's precise. Precision always feels personal." I thought about that for a long time. I told myself he was right. I told myself to be professional. I told myself that a challenging teaching assistant was good for my intellectual development and that I should focus on using her feedback constructively rather than sitting here on Finn's saggy sofa feeling sorry for myself. All of this was sensible and reasonable. None of it stopped me from thinking about her more than I should have. November in Edinburgh is dark by 3 in the afternoon. This sounds like an exaggeration, but is, in fact, simply meteorological reality. The city wraps itself in early darkness and rain and the particular cold that comes off the North Sea, and the students respond by spending increasing amounts of time in the library, which is open until midnight and whose warmth and amber lamplight become genuinely precious things. I was there nearly every evening. So I began to realize was Elliot. She had a particular corner on the 3rd floor, a desk tucked behind a tall shelf of 19th century periodicals, facing a window that looked out onto the dark garden below. I noticed her there the third or fourth time I passed that section of stacks on my way to the Scottish literature collection. And after that I was aware of her presence in a low level, persistent way that was beginning to irritate me. I want to be honest here. Because this story deserves honesty, I was attracted to her. I've been trying not to be the way you try not to think of a word once someone has told you not to think of it, with the predictable effect that the word was essentially all you could think of. Elliot was brilliant and sharp and physically striking and completely indifferent to me in a way that, infuriatingly, only seemed to intensify the pull. I was aware that this was probably not psychologically healthy. I was also aware that awareness alone doesn't actually change feelings, which is one of the more frustrating facts of being a human being. In early November, I was working late on an essay and had stayed until the library was nearly empty. It was a Friday night, which perhaps explained why most sensible people had gone home. I was wrestling with a secondary source that kept slipping out from under my argument, writing and deleting the same paragraph for the fourth time, when I heard a sound I didn't expect, a small, sharp sound, like something being slammed down. I looked up from my laptop and peered around the shelf. Elliot was sitting at her desk with her hands pressed flat on either side of her laptop, staring at the screen with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something tight and strained. Something that was very definitely not the composed neutrality she wore in seminars. After a moment she pushed her chair back and pressed both hands over her face and sat very still. I should have looked away. I should have minded my own business and returned to my struggling paragraph instead, because apparently I was constitutionally incapable of good decisions where she was concerned. I stood up and walked around the shelf. "Are you all right?" I said. She dropped her hands immediately. The composed expression reassembled itself on her face like a shutter closing. Fast and complete. "Fine," she said. "You don't look fine." Something moved across her face, a flash of something that might have been irritation or might have been surprise. I wasn't aware I was being observed. "You weren't really?" I just heard. I stopped. "Sorry, I'll go back." I had already turned around when she said, "Zara." I turned back. She was looking at me with the evaluating expression I recognized from seminars. Except there was something slightly different about it now, something fractionally less armored. "The coffee machine on this floor," she said. "Is it still working?" "As of an hour ago." "It's terrible coffee." "I know. I've been drinking it for 3 years." She stood up, and there was a quality to the movement that suggested it took more effort than she wanted to show. "Come on, then." I don't know why I followed her. Self-preservation would have been a reasonable choice. Going back to my laptop would have been a reasonable choice. What was not a reasonable choice, given everything I'd been carefully not feeling for the past 2 months, was walking beside this woman through the nearly empty library at 11 at night toward a vending machine serving terrible coffee. And yet the coffee machine was in a small alcove near the lifts. It dispensed something that was technically coffee in a thin plastic cup that was too hot to hold comfortably. We stood there in the fluorescent half-light, both holding cups we couldn't comfortably hold. And the silence stretched between us in a way that felt different from the seminar room silences, less charged with evaluation. More simply awkward. "Your last paper," she said eventually. I felt my shoulders stiffen. "What about it?" I was harder on it than I needed to be. I looked at her. This was not something I had expected. "What?" The argument was actually quite strong. The central thesis. She looked at her coffee instead of at me. I focused disproportionately on the structural weaknesses. The core idea deserved more acknowledgement. I absorbed this. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because it's been bothering me." She said it in the manner of someone making a clinical observation about themselves, not embarrassed exactly, but slightly irritated, as though her conscience was a minor inconvenience. I don't soften feedback unnecessarily. But being rigorous and being fair aren't the same thing, and I wasn't entirely fair. I didn't know what to do with this. I had built up over the past weeks a careful internal narrative in which Elliot was simply cold by nature, professionally indifferent to students in a way that was nothing personal. This version, Elliot standing in an empty library alcove at 11 on a Friday night, choosing to acknowledge that she'd been unfair, didn't fit neatly into that narrative. "Thank you," I said, "for saying that." She nodded once. Drank her terrible coffee. Then she said, without looking up, what was the sound like? Just now at my desk. What did you hear? I paused. Like you hit something. Or pushed something, a long beat. My dissertation supervisor sent back my chapter today, she said. Third revision. He still doesn't think the theoretical framework is right. Something in her voice was controlled very carefully. Controlled in the way of someone who has had a lot of practice keeping difficult things contained. He may be correct. I'm not certain anymore what I think. I had not expected this either. Any of this. I had expected Elliot to be opaque and remote in her private life as she was in seminars. And instead, she was standing in front of me with her coffee and her admitted uncertainty about her own work, and I felt something shift in my chest that I really would have preferred didn't shift. What's the framework? I asked. She looked at me for a moment. You actually want to know? I'm doing a master's in literature. It's 11 o'clock on a Friday. What else am I doing? Something happened at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't quite a smile, it was like the idea of a smile, the smallest possible movement in that direction. Affect theory. I'm arguing that late Victorian sensation fiction is doing something more complex than it's given credit for in terms of affect management, that it's not just producing sensation in readers but modeling emotional regulation strategies. The argument is about a cultural technology of feeling. That's brilliant, I said. I said it before I had time to consider whether it was strategically wise to say, before I could filter it through the layer of careful professionalism I've been trying to maintain. I just said it because it was what I thought. She looked at me steadily. Your supervisor thinks the theory is wrong? I continued. He thinks it's overreaching. That I'm making claims about cultural function that require evidence I haven't adequately provided. Is he right? Possibly. She looked back at her coffee. He usually is, but... Another small pause. But I'm not sure he's seeing what the argument is actually doing. There's a difference between overreaching and attempting something genuinely new. She said it quietly, almost to herself, like she was still working it out. And I'm not always sure which one I'm doing. We talked for 40 minutes. Standing in that alcove, drinking terrible coffee that went cold. We talked about her dissertation and effect, theory and Victorian sensation fiction, and then somehow about wolf and interiority. And then about whether it was possible to argue that any act of reading was inherently political. She argued positions she disagreed with to test them, the same way she did in seminars. But now I understood that it wasn't combativeness for its own sake, it was how she thought, how she chased ideas. Using friction to generate heat, when the library announced over its PA system that it was closing in 15 minutes. We both seemed to come back to ourselves simultaneously. She looked slightly surprised, which I found unexpectedly charming. Like she had forgotten where she was. I should. She started. Me too, I said. We gathered our things separately and walked out into the Edinburgh night, which was cold and damp and smelled of rain. And we stood on the pavement outside the library, and there was a moment, brief, inconclusive, easy to read incorrectly, where we looked at each other and neither of us said anything. Good night, Zara, she said finally. Good night, I said. I walked home in the dark and told myself very firmly that nothing had happened and nothing was going to happen, and this was fine. I didn't sleep well. After that night, something changed. I couldn't have pointed to it precisely. It wasn't that she became warm. It wasn't that Thursday seminars became suddenly gentle or encouraging. She was still rigorous. She still pushed back on weak arguments. She still moved through the world with that particular quality of self-containment that made her seem like she existed a few degrees cooler than everyone else, but she started looking at me differently. It was subtle. The kind of thing you could easily convince yourself you were imagining. A slightly longer beat of eye contact when I made a point in seminar. The occasional direct question addressed to me specifically, not in the testing way, but in the way of someone who actually wanted to hear what I thought. Once she referenced a point I'd made 3 weeks earlier in a context where it fit, and she did it in a way that made clear she remembered it, had been thinking about it, had filed it away. I tried to be sensible. I was doing a reasonable job of it. Then came the department Christmas social. This was held in the common room in early December, decorated with the resigned festivity of academic institutions, everywhere a string of lights, a tray of mulled wine, a plate of supermarket mince pies. Most of the department came, including the PhD students. I arrived with Finn and a girl from my cohort named Deepa, who had become something of a small friend group with me. I was 3 cups of mulled wine in when I realized Elliot was standing across the room looking at me, not in a casual, scanning the room way. Actually looking. At me specifically, I looked back. She looked away first, which almost never happened. Later, maybe half an hour later, I found myself at the drinks table at the same time she did. It was the kind of coincidence that might have been a coincidence. I didn't take you for a departmental social person, I said. Because the wine had loosened something and I was feeling slightly reckless. I'm not, she said. She poured mulled wine into a cup with the air of someone doing something they've decided to do, regardless of whether they want to. Professor Harrington explicitly asked me to come. She can't make you come to a party. She has influence over my funding renewal. A pause. So in practical terms, she can. I actually laughed, not the polite approximation. She looked at me when I did with that quality of attention that had been increasingly difficult to pretend I wasn't aware of. What are you doing over the break? I asked, working. She said it like it was the only possible answer. My supervisor wants another chapter draft by January. And I have a conference paper due, all of December? Most of it? A slight shift in her expression. My mother lives in Inverness. I'll go up for a few days. I noticed she said a few days, not for Christmas, which would have implied ease, normality, the assumption of celebration. Just a few days, bracketed like an obligation. I'm going home for 2 weeks, I said. London. My family does a very loud Christmas involving many cousins and someone always crying at some point, but not in a bad way usually. That sounds, she seemed to search for the word. Alive. Something about the way she said it, not envious, exactly, but registering something. Noting the shape of what she didn't have made me feel a tenderness that I hadn't meant to feel. I looked at her over the rim of my cup and thought about the library on that Friday night and the way she pressed her hands over her face and the way she told me her dissertation argument with the same precision she used for everything, as though emotional exposure and intellectual discussion existed on the same plane for her, could be approached with the same rigor. Elliot, I said. And then I wasn't sure what I had meant to say after her name. She waited. Your argument is right, I said finally. About the sensation fiction. I've been thinking about it. You're not overreaching, you're doing something new. And your supervisor is measuring it against an existing framework because that's how supervisors think. But the framework you're building doesn't have to map onto what already exists to be valid. She was quiet for a moment. You've been thinking about my dissertation. It's an interesting argument. Which was true. It was also true that I'd been thinking about it because thinking about her work meant thinking about her. Which meant that I had apparently found a way to think about Elia Voss while still technically thinking about Victorian literature. You should come to my research seminar in January, she said. I'm presenting the chapter. You can see whether you still think the argument holds. I recognize this for what it was, an invitation. A careful, professionally framed, deniable invitation. The kind that someone who didn't know how to make invitations might make. I'd like that, I said. She nodded. Looked down at her cup. Then she said very quietly, I hope your Christmas is loud. She walked away before I could answer. January came in cold and sharp and clear in that way. Edinburgh sometimes surprised you with the sky a blue so bright it seemed almost aggressive after weeks of gray. I came back from London feeling simultaneously restored by my family and faintly dislocated. The way you sometimes feel after being reminded of who you were before you became who you are now. My sister, Nadia, had asked about my course. About Edinburgh, about whether I was happy. In the way that sisters do when they're asking not just the surface question. I'm good, I had said. There's a lot going on. A lot going on academically or a lot going on generally. She had looked at me with the particular attention of someone who had known me since before I could form coherent sentences. Both, I admitted. She let it sit there. There's someone, I finally said. In my department? It's nothing. Right, Nadia said. In the way she said right when she meant she didn't believe me but was going to let me reach the truth on my own timeline. I came back to Edinburgh on a Thursday, which meant I went to seminar on my first day back. Walking into the overwarm room with its tall windows, and Elliot was already there, arranging papers on the table. And she looked up when I came in. How was London? She said. She remembered. She had asked and she had remembered. Loud, I said. Something softened infinitesimally in her expression. Good. The research seminar she'd invited me to was the following week. It was held in a different building, a larger room where PhD students presented work in progress to the wider department. I went alone, sitting in the third row with my coat still on because the building had a different kind of heating that worked less efficiently. Elliot presented for 45 minutes. She was different in that room than she was in seminar, more exposed, inevitably, since it was her own work under discussion rather than a text she was facilitating others to engage with. There was a quality of controlled vulnerability to the presentation that I suspected only I noticed, or noticed in that particular way. The way her hand closed around her pen tightly at certain moments. The way she paused a half beat longer than usual when she hit the sections her supervisor had challenged. The argument was good. It was more than good, it was genuinely original. The kind of scholarly thinking that didn't just add to a conversation but shifted the terms of it. During the Q&A, a professor in the front row, a man I vaguely recognized as having very traditional views about Victorian literature, challenged the theoretical foundations in a way that was pointed enough to be uncomfortable. Elliot answered him with such precise, controlled composure that I felt something almost fierce rise up in me on her behalf. When it was over and people were milling around, I waited. Most people drifted out. She was talking to another PhD student, a long-haired man named Sebastian, who was clearly telling her the presentation had gone well. She received this the way she received most social overtures, with a small, correct smile and a nod. Then, she saw me still there. She said something to Sebastian and walked over. You stayed. She sighed. You invited me. I didn't think you'd actually come. This surprised me. Why did you invite me then? A pause. She seemed to be deciding something. I wanted you to see it. The argument. Her eyes met mine directly. I wanted to know if you'd still think it held. It holds, I said. The Professor Whitmore question was a diversionary tactic. He's defending a reading of Collins that your argument displaces. So of course he's going to challenge the framework. He's arguing from self-interest dressed up as methodology. Something shifted on her face. Something that was not quite a smile but was warmer than anything I had seen before, less armored. A small light finding its way through. That's exactly what he was doing, she said. I know. She looked at me. A long, quiet look that felt different from all the evaluating looks that had come before it. More open. More uncertain. Even Elliot uncertain was a new quality in the world, one I didn't know what to do with. Zara, she said. And then she stopped. What? She shook her head slightly. Nothing. Thank you for coming. But it hadn't been nothing. Whatever she had been about to say had been something, and we both knew it. Weeks passed. February arrived. The semester moved into its second half, essays due and seminars intensifying as the module built toward its close. Outside my academic life, I was learning Edinburgh, learning its geography and its habits, its particular beauties that were so different from London's. I walked a lot. I went to poetry readings in small pubs. I found a second-hand bookshop on a narrow close off the Royal Mile that became something close to sacred to me. I started seeing Finn for coffee regularly. And Deepa and I had developed the comfortable intimacy of people who studied near each other and ate lunch at the same times and talked about everything. They both knew in the unspoken way of good friends that something was happening with me. Finn, who was gay himself, was the one who eventually named it. It's Elliot, isn't it? He said one afternoon over coffee. I was quiet. Zara, it's fine. I'm not going to tell anyone. It's complicated. I said. She's your teaching assistant. No, she's also incredibly intimidating and runs seminars like she's conducting an interrogation. She's different outside seminars. He looked at me. How do you know what she's like outside seminars? I told him about the library and the Christmas social. And the research seminar. He listened to all of it with the expression of someone watching a film they know the ending of, but are interested to see play out. She likes you, he said. You don't know that. I do, actually. She told everyone else their arguments were category errors. She told you your thesis was not entirely wrong. For Elliot, that's basically a declaration of love. That's absurd. Is it? He tilted his head. How many other students has she invited to her research seminar? I didn't answer. He picked up his coffee. What are you scared of? Many things, I said honestly. Which one specifically? I thought about it. Not the professional complications, those were real but manageable. Not even the uncertainty of whether what I was reading in her was real or constructed by my own hoping. What I was scared of, when I was honest about it, was the specific thing that came with Elliot's particular kind of coldness. The knowledge that if she let you in and then closed the door again, the cold would be worse than it had been before. Because you'd have known for a moment what warmth felt like. Being let in and then shut out, I said. Finn nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. That makes sense. In March, something happened that I didn't expect. I saw Elliot fall apart, not completely. Not publicly. But I saw it was a Tuesday evening, not a library night, and I'd stayed late in the departmental building working in one of the shared postgraduate study rooms. It was past 7 and the building was quiet. I was passing the kitchen on my way to the exit when I heard her voice through the partially open door, not words. Just tone, and the tone was wrong. I stopped. The tone was controlled, but barely. The kind of barely controlled that makes your voice thin and too quiet. I pushed the door open slightly. She was on the phone, standing with her back to the door, one hand pressed against the counter. That's not no, Mom, that's not what I said. A pause. I'm not coming home in March, I told you. I have a deadline. Another pause, longer. I know that. I know, her voice went quieter. I'm not angry. I'm just a very long silence. Okay, she said finally. Flat and exhausted. Okay, I'll call you this weekend. She hung up. She stood very still for a moment. Then she turned around and saw me in the doorway, and her face went through several things very quickly before settling into something controlled. How long have you been there? She asked. Not long. I'm sorry. I was just passing. She looked at me. Something in her eyes was unguarded in a way. I never seen not quite pain, but the thing. That comes just before pain when you're very tired and have been holding something for a long time. I came into the kitchen instead of continuing to the exit. Do you want tea? I said. I'm making tea anyway. This was a lie. I had not been planning to make tea, but it was a useful lie. The kind that gives someone a way to accept help without having to explicitly ask for it. She sat down at the small table. Thank you. I made tea. I found mugs that weren't too stained and tea bags that weren't too old, and I made 2 cups and set one in front of her and sat down across from her. We were quiet for a moment. My mother, she said without me asking. She's not well. Nothing immediately serious, it's her heart. Managed, she's been managing it for 2 years. But it worries me. And she worries about me worrying, so she doesn't always tell me things, and then I find out later and she stopped. It's a particular loop. When did she get the diagnosis? 2 years ago. Just before I started the PhD. Something shifted in her face, a connection made visible. Which is perhaps not entirely coincidental in terms of the timing of the PhD being more difficult than it might otherwise have been. I thought about the chapters she'd been revising the night in the library. The 3 revisions and the doubt she'd expressed about her own argument. I thought about how I'd understood it then as intellectual pressure alone and was now revising that understanding. Are you close? I asked. With your mother? She considered this. Complicated. She doesn't understand my work, the academic world. She wanted different things for me. Not in a controlling way, just she had a shape in mind for my life, and the shape I've made doesn't quite match it. She wrapped her hands around her mug. She loves me. I don't doubt that. We just don't always speak the same language. My family is the opposite, I said. We speak fluently to each other about most things. I paused. Not all things. She looked at me. I'm gay, I said. I said it simply, without the careful preamble I usually built around it. My family doesn't know. Most of them. My sister does. I looked at my tea. It's the one thing we don't speak fluently about, a silence. Why are you telling me this? She said. Not unkindly. Genuinely asking, I thought about it honestly. Because you just told me something true. And it seemed like the right thing to give back. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'm gay too. Said it in the same simple, unadorned way I'd said it, like we were just exchanging facts. Like we'd found a new territory where things could be stated plainly. I hadn't known this for certain. I had suspected in the way you sometimes recognize something in a person that echoes something in yourself. But it felt different to hear it said. Does your mother know? I asked. Yes. A small pause. She knows and she loves me anyway, which I'm grateful for. But there's a version of my life she envisioned that had a husband in it, and she grieves that version sometimes, I think. Quietly, she would never say so. Mine would grieve loudly, I said. But I think she'd come through it. I think they all would. I just haven't found the right time yet. I paused. Which might be a thing I'll say forever. Something moved on Elliot's face. It might be, she said. Or it might be that the right time arrives when you stop waiting for it and make it. I looked at her. Is that what you did? More or less. She drank her tea. I was 20. It was the worst and best thing I'd done up to that point. A brief something, not quite a smile, but in its neighborhood. My mother cried. Then she made dinner. Then she asked me what I wanted to eat, as though the answer might have changed. Very my mother. I laughed. She looked pleased, not broadly, not in a way that changed her whole face, but pleased in the quiet, specific way of someone who's not used to being the reason for someone else's warmth. We sat in that kitchen until 8:30. The building around us was empty and quiet, and the Edinburgh dark pressed against the window, and we talked, the way we had talked in the library. Honestly and without performance, following the conversation wherever it led. She told me about growing up in a small town outside Inverness, the daughter of a Finnish mother and a Scottish father who had died when she was 15, which explained something about the particular quality of her self-containment, the way she'd been shaped by early loss into someone who did not rely on others for structural support. I told her about growing up in a British Bangladeshi household in East London, about the layered identity of being from a community that held beauty and belonging and also pressure and unspoken expectation, about loving my family completely and still feeling sometimes like there was a room inside me they didn't have the key to when I finally said I had to go. She walked me to the building's front door. We stood in the entrance hall and she looked at me, and there was that quality again, the one I had started noticing at the Christmas social. The one that felt like something trying to find a way out. Zara, she said, double quotes, yes? Another pause. She pressed her lips together. Then she said, I owe you a proper apology for the beginning of semester. Not just the paper. The whole beginning. She stopped. Started again. I am not always good at not being guarded. And when I'm guarded, I can be cold, I said. She met my eyes. Yes, why were you guarded with me specifically? The longest pause yet. Because you were the only person in that seminar room who made me feel like I needed to be. I absorbed that very carefully. Good night. Elliot, I said. Good night, she said. I walked out into the cold night and I allowed myself, for the first time, to feel the full weight of what was happening. Not analyzed, not managed, not carefully contained. Just felt. It felt enormous. March moved into April. The Edinburgh weather tentatively considered becoming less punishing and occasionally succeeded. There were days of thin, clear warmth, and the gardens began making their tentative arguments for life crocuses, appearing with a persistence that seemed almost willfully optimistic. Given the general conditions, something was growing between Elliot and me with the same tentative persistence. We had not named it. We had not in any practical sense moved toward it. The Thursday seminars continued as they always had, and to a casual observer, to Finn, who watched us both with the attention of someone invested in the outcome, nothing had changed. Elliot was still rigorous, still demanding, still capable of taking apart a lazy argument with the precision of a surgeon. But privately, things had shifted substantially. We texted. This had begun naturally. Without ceremony, she had texted me a paper she thought I'd find useful for my dissertation proposal, and I had replied. And the reply had led to a back and forth about the paper, and then about something adjacent, and then about something else entirely. We developed a texting relationship that was distinct from our institutional relationship, that existed in a parallel space with its own vocabulary. She recommended things. Books I hadn't read, a podcast about the history of British industrial fiction, a small exhibition at the National Museum she thought I'd find interesting. I went to the exhibition on a Saturday afternoon and texted her a photograph of a display case that contained Victorian trade cards, which had struck me as unexpectedly beautiful. She replied, "I know." "The typography," I replied. "The typography exactly." And somehow that was entirely complete as a conversation. We started walking sometimes. This was the development that felt largest to me at the time. She walked for thinking she had told me this, and she began sometimes texting to ask if I was free in the late afternoon. And I was, and we walked. Through the new town's orderly Georgian streets, up toward Calton Hill in the early spring wind, along the water of Leith when the light was right. We talked about her dissertation and my dissertation proposal and books and ideas, and, gradually, increasingly ourselves, I learned her in pieces. Learned that she had an unexpected and very dry sense of humor that she deployed infrequently and with precision, so that when it appeared it surprised you every time. Learned that she was more patient with her students than her seminar. Manner suggested that she stayed late after sessions to answer questions from people who'd been too nervous to ask in the room. Learned that she found social gatherings genuinely exhausting in a way that she'd always experienced as a personal failing before she'd understood it as simply how she was wired. She learned me too. Asked questions that were always specific. Never generic, not, "What was it like growing up in your family? But you said your mother reads constantly." "What does she read?" She listened to the answers in a way that felt like she was filing things carefully, building a detailed interior image of who I was. In April, she invited me to dinner. Not in a way that was explicitly named as anything other than dinner. She said she was making something on Friday evening and did I want to come? And I said yes with a steadiness that I was proud of. Given that my internal state at the time was the opposite of steady, her flat was in Marchmont, a 20-minute walk from my own. It was the flat of a person who lived entirely inside their own mind. Books everywhere, not just on shelves, but stacked on surfaces. Piled on the floor in careful columns, organized in a system that probably made sense only to her. Her desk was in the corner of the sitting room and was covered with papers in an arrangement that looked chaotic but probably wasn't. The walls were mostly bare except for a large print of a text-dense Victorian newspaper front page that she'd framed. She cooked pasta. Nothing elaborate, a simple cassio e pepe that she made with the same competent precision she brought to everything. We ate at her small kitchen table with wine and the last of the evening light coming through the window. And we talked without any of the careful professional distance that governed our institutional lives. And it was the most comfortable I'd felt in that city since I'd arrived. After dinner we moved to the sitting room. She put music on quiet, unobtrusive, and we sat on opposite ends of her sofa with our wine. And the conversation moved through several things before settling into a quiet that was different from awkward silence. That was simply the quiet of two people comfortable enough to stop filling space. And in that quiet, she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes, what you said." "About your family not knowing." I felt my hands still slightly around my glass. "Yes, is it, are you afraid? When you think about telling them?" I thought about the honest answer. Yes and no. I don't think they'll reject me. My parents they love me, they're not, but there will be grief. And a lot of questions. And my mother will worry about what it means for my future in terms of things like marriage and children. And for a while those conversations will be hard. I paused. I'm more afraid of the change than the rejection. Of things being different. Of them seeing me differently. They already see who you are, she said. The telling doesn't change who you are. It changes what they know. I know that. But knowing doesn't make it easier. No, she was quiet for a moment, looking at her glass. When I told my mother, I was terrified she would look at me differently afterward. See me differently. As something other than what I'd been before. A beat. She didn't. But I'd been carrying the fear of it for so long that telling her almost felt like a loss because the fear had become familiar, comfortable in its way. I understood this so precisely that it took my breath slightly. Yes, I said. Exactly that. She looked at me. I looked at her. The room was very quiet. The music had moved to something slow and minimal. The Edinburgh evening was doing its thing outside the window, turning the sky over the rooftops the color of old copper, and she reached across the sofa and put her hand over mine. Not dramatically. Not with any of the gravity that the gesture perhaps deserved. Just her hand over my hand, warm and deliberate and steady. My heart did several things in rapid succession. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. I want to say that up front. Do what? This. She looked at our hands. I am not good at it. I am better at distance. At being composed and separate and not needing. She said the last word carefully, as though it cost her something. I was very unkind to you at the beginning of semester. Not consciously unkind, but unkind. And I think you know why. Because I unsettled you, I said softly. Because you unsettled me. She met my eyes. And I responded to being unsettled by retreating, armoring, being harder than I needed to be. Her hand was still on mine. Still warm. Still steady. I don't want to do that. I want to try to not do that. With you? I'm telling you this because I think you should know it, not because I'm asking you for anything. I turned my hand over under hers so our palms were touching. I know, I said. You can tell me things. I'm not going to use them against you. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her face was more open than I had ever seen it, more present and unguarded. And underneath the composure that never fully left her, there was something that looked almost frightened. In the way of someone standing at an edge. They'd been avoiding for a long time. She reached up with her other hand and touched my face. Just the side of my face, my cheek, very lightly, as though I was something she was still deciding whether to trust. Zara, she said. Yes, I said. Not as an answer to a question. As permission for whatever the question was, she kissed me. It was quiet and careful and entirely unlike the sharp, precise person I'd met in September. It was like finding a room in a house you thought you knew completely, a room that had been there all along. That changed the whole shape of the house just by being discovered. When she pulled back, she was looking at me with the expression I'd been trying to classify for months and finally understood. It was the expression of someone who was not sure they deserved what they were feeling. I was so unkind to you, she said quietly, almost to herself. You were, I said. And now you're being kind. Both things are true. She closed her eyes briefly. Open them again? Yes, she said. Both things are true. We did not leap into anything. This felt important in retrospect, the care with which we came toward each other. The absence of the reckless urgency that I associate with infatuation and that had always seemed designed to paper over the HUD. Things that eventually crack open anyway. She told her supervisor she'd resolved the theoretical framework issue. She had, because she'd finally understood, and I like to think our conversations had something to do with this, that the problem wasn't the framework but the way she'd been defending it, positioning it as though it needed to justify itself in pre-existing terms rather than establishing its own terms first. I started working on my dissertation proposal with a new kind of focus. Something about being more settled in myself was settling my work too. I stopped second-guessing every instinct and started trusting the argument. I was building. We were careful about the professional boundary, which mattered to both of us. She was my teaching assistant until the module ended in May, and during that time nothing changed in the seminar room. She was rigorous and demanding, and I gave her no reason to be otherwise. Then noticed but said nothing except once to raise his eyebrows at me in a way that conveyed an entire paragraph. I raised my eyebrows back. Outside the seminar room, we were learning each other properly. She came to know all the corners of me that I kept folded, the ongoing negotiation with my own identity, the guilt I felt sometimes about not being out to my family, the perfectionism that drove me and also periodically drove me into the ground. I came to know her, the grief she still carried for her father, worn smooth by years but still there, the ambition that existed alongside genuine intellectual love of her work, not despite it. The loneliness of the past few years that she'd managed by converting it into productivity. Into pages, into the clean architecture of argument. We were, in some deep ways, similar. Both people who had learned to keep large parts of themselves private. Both people who expressed care through attention rather than through easy warmth. Both people who found it easier to talk about ideas than to say I'm scared. Or I need this, but we were teaching each other the other thing, slowly, with the care you give to learning. Something important. One evening in early May, lying on our sofa in the late evening light with a book I wasn't really reading, I said, I'm going to tell my mother. She looked up from her desk, where she was working. When I go home at the end of term, I said, I'm going to tell her. And my father? A pause. Do you want me to call you after? She said, yes, I said. If it's not yes, I'd like that. She nodded. Then she said, you've been thinking about this for a while. Since the kitchen, I said. When you said the right time arrives. When you stop waiting for it and make it. She got up from the desk and came and sat beside me on the sofa, and I put my head on her shoulder, and she was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was most herself. Not with silence, but with a presence that felt like an arm around you even when it wasn't. I'll be here, she said. Two simple words that contained something enormous. The module ended. The seminar room relationship dissolved back into whatever we were when there was no institutional frame around us, and what we were turned out to be something real and solid and continuing to grow. She submitted her chapter. One submitted my dissertation proposal. We celebrated both these things with a dinner at a restaurant on the Royal Mile that was more expensive than either of us could comfortably afford. And over wine, she said my proposal argument was genuinely original, and I said her chapter was going to be the making of the dissertation. And we looked at each other across the table, and there was a happiness between us that was quiet and not performed and entirely new to me. I went home in June. The house in East London was the same as it always was, full of noise and cooking smells. My mother moving through the kitchen with the purposeful efficiency of someone who feeds people as an act of love. My father watching something on television and calling out commentary at it. My mother had made biryani because I asked for it. There were flowers on the table. I had been home for 2 days before I understood that. I was terrified, not of rejection. I still didn't think they would reject me, but of the change, of what Elliot had helped me articulate, the loss of the familiar fear. The fear had been part of my internal architecture for so long that I couldn't quite envision myself without it. Nadia called on the second evening. How are you doing? She said. Have you done it yet? No, I said. When? Tomorrow, I said. I think, they're going to be okay, she said. I know. And if they're not okay immediately, they'll work through it and eventually be okay. I know that too. So the thing you're afraid of is what, exactly? I thought about what Elliot had said. Being seen differently. Being the version they have to adjust to. Zara, Nadia's voice was gentle. They already know you. The tell doesn't change that. It just adds one more piece of a person they already love completely. Those were almost exactly Elliot's words. I would tell her that later. The next morning after breakfast, when my father was still at the table with his tea and my mother had sat down after all the clearing up, I said, there's something I've been wanting to tell you both for a long time. What followed was complicated and tender and difficult and exactly as I had imagined it and nothing like I had imagined it. My mother cried, but not in the way I'd feared, not in grief, but in a mix of things, including the complicated relief of something she had suspected beginning to make sense. My father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, you are my daughter. This doesn't change anything about that. There were questions, and some of them were hard, and there were conversations we'd be having for months ahead. But when I went upstairs that afternoon, I sat on my childhood bed and I felt the fear going out of me like something had been released, not painlessly but cleanly. The way a long-held breath finally lets go. I called Elliot. She answered on the second ring. I told them, I said. A brief silence. Then, how are you? Good, I said. And then, shaky, but good. Both things can be true, she said. And I could hear in her voice that she was smiling. I know, I said. You taught me that. Summer in Edinburgh is genuinely lovely when it decides to be long evenings of pale northern light, the city golden in ways that surprise you if you only know it gray. Elliot stayed to work on her dissertation. I stayed because I had research to do and because staying meant being near her. And that was a reason that was increasingly significant. We were, by this point, simply together. Not defined dramatically or announced formally, it was more that we had moved into each other's lives with such gradual naturalness that there was no single moment that constituted beginning. It was a series of moments. The first time she used her key to let herself into my flat without knocking. The first time I brought her tea at her desk without her asking. The first time we argued about something, a real argument. About her tendency to work when she was exhausted rather than rest, which worried me and frustrated her, and found our way through it not by resolving the disagreement but by understanding each other's position. Clearly enough that the disagreement stopped needing to be won. She was working on her second chapter and I was deep in my dissertation literature review, and we worked side by side, often in her flat or mine, companionable in the silence that two people can share when they're secure enough to not need to fill it. I saw the full range of her now. Saw the days when the work went badly and she became very still and internal in a way that looked like coldness but was just her way of weathering difficulty, of turning inward to find steadiness. Saw the days when something clicked in the dissertation and she would come and find me wherever I was and read me a sentence or a paragraph with the quality of barely contained excitement that she wore almost shyly. Like she wasn't quite used to feeling that kind of delight without also feeling slightly embarrassed by it. Saw her be patient with a student who kept emailing her the same question with minor variations. Saw her make dinner methodically and with concentration, as though cooking were a problem to be solved correctly. Saw her fall asleep in the middle of a documentary about Victorian architecture, her head dropping against my shoulder in increments, and felt the tenderness of that, the weight of her trust in me. Literally, I loved her. I hadn't said it yet. Neither of us had. There was something about us that moved carefully around the large things, named them only when we'd grown sure enough to bear the weight of the naming. In August, she came with me to London for a week. She met my parents. This was significant in ways I found difficult to fully articulate in advance and recognized clearly in retrospect. Elliot in my family home was Elliot outside every context I'd known her in, and watching her navigate it, politely reserved at first, careful the way she was in any new situation, and then gradually warmer as she realized the warmth was reciprocated and genuine, was one of the more moving things I'd witnessed. My mother, who's the kind of person who expresses love primarily through feeding people, made approximately 4 times as much food as we could eat. Elliot ate it with the genuine appreciation of someone who has spent too long eating alone and making functional things rather than joyful ones. My mother noticed this and was delighted by it. My father asked her about her research with the interested seriousness of a man who had spent his career as a civil engineer and had enormous respect for people who built things with their minds. She explained it to him carefully, finding the right level of technical detail. And he asked questions and she answered. Then, and by the end of the conversation, he looked satisfied in the way he looked when he'd assessed something and found it. Nadia met us for dinner at a restaurant near Brick Lane. She and Elliot regarded each other across the table with the mutual wariness of two people who are protective of the same person and are deciding whether to trust each other. By the end of the meal, Nadia was making Elliot laugh with a story about one of her teaching nightmares. And Elliot's laugh, a real one, full and unguarded. The laugh she had when she forgot to be composed made Nadia look at me across the table with an expression I will keep for a very long time. It said, yes. This one, good. The night before we left London, we were sitting on the steps outside my parents' house in the warm August evening, and she said, "Your family is wonderful." "I know," I said. "Thank you for bringing me. Thank you for coming." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the street, the familiar shapes of the houses. "I was afraid," she said. "Of what?" "Of not being enough. For them. For you in this context." She turned to look at me. "I'm not easy. I know that. I'm not warm in the way that's easy to receive. I've been told more than once that I'm difficult to be close to." "Who told you that?" I said. My voice came out softer than I meant. People passed. She looked away. It wasn't wrong, Elliot. She looked back at me. You are the least easy person I have ever been close to, I said. You are demanding and precise, and you don't make things comfortable just for the sake of comfort. And when you're struggling, you go cold and distant before you go anywhere near asking for help. I held her gaze. And you are also the most honest person I know. You tell me true things when they're hard to say. You are kinder than you know you are, which is somehow more moving than people who know it. You remember everything I've told you and you take it seriously. You make me think harder and feel more carefully than anyone I've ever known. I paused. You are not easy. But you are worth it. Completely and specifically worth it. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her face was very open. I love you, she said. Simply in the same plain way she'd said everything that mattered. I want you to know that. I don't say that. I know you don't, I said. I know that means something. It means everything, she said. I love you too, I said. I've been waiting to say it until it felt like the right time. Is this the right time? I think you stop waiting for the right time and you make it, I said. The corner of her mouth moved. You're quoting me at me, frequently and without apology. She took my face in her hands the way she had the first time. Careful and wondering, and she kissed me in the warm London. Evening with the sounds of the street around. US and my parents' house behind us and everything. That had happened every cold seminar. Room moment and library midnight and kitchen cup of tea and Edinburgh walk and long conversation that had built us into what we were, and it was better than that first kiss. Deeper and more certain because now we both knew exactly what we were choosing. This is what love actually looked like. When I lived it, it looked like two people who were not easy. Learning each other with patience and without the expectation of perfection. It looked like arguments that were honest rather than avoided, that said I see this differently and not you are wrong, that found their way through to understanding without needing to find a winner. It looked like separate work and shared evenings. Books on two sides of the sofa. Tea left at a desk. The small physical vocabulary of people who have learned each other's bodies and habits and needs. It looked like her talking me through the difficult week in October when my dissertation supervisor challenged my central argument and I had the specific intellectual crisis of wondering whether everything I built was unsound. The way she sat across from me and worked through it with me. Not telling me it was fine when it wasn't fine, but taking the problem seriously and helping me find my way back to the argument's solid ground. It looked like me knowing when she was struggling with the dissertation and going to her flat and making dinner without being asked and putting it in front of her without ceremony, and her looking up from her laptop in the particular way she looked at me in those moments. Like I was something she still wasn't entirely used to having. It looked like phone calls with my mother that were increasingly easy, that moved gradually from careful and a little strained to natural and full of laughter. My mother learning to ask about Elliot the way she asked about any important person in my life, asking what she was working on and whether she was eating properly, which was such a pure expression of my mother that it made me smile every time. It looked like visiting Inverness in the autumn. Just the two of us spending a few days with her mother in the house she'd grown up in. Her mother was small and Finnish-inflected, with Elliot's green eyes and a warmth that explained, I thought, everything about the person Elliot was working to become. The warmth was there underneath in the blueprint. It had just been pressed down by loss and fear and the habit of self-protection. We walked in the Highlands in October, under skies that could have been painted, and she told me about her father, talked about him more than she usually did. In those open spaces, as though the landscape permitted it. How funny he was. How much he had loved this place. How she had sometimes walked these same routes with him when she was small and he had named things for her. The birds and the plants and the particular shapes of clouds. And how she still sometimes named things in her head when she walked, and understood this as a form of his continued presence. I held her hand and listened and felt the enormous privilege of being the person she chose to tell. In November, she passed her chapter review. Her supervisor finally said the theoretical framework was not only sound but genuinely innovative. which was what we had both known for months, but was nonetheless enormously satisfying to hear officially confirmed. She called me from outside the meeting room, and I could hear in her voice the controlled, private elation of someone who has worked very hard for a very long time. "Congratulations," I said. "It's one chapter," she said. "It's the right chapter. The hard one. You know that." A pause. "Yes," she said. "I know." In December, I passed my first-year dissertation assessment. The panel said my argument was original and my theoretical grounding was strong. I called my mother first. I called Elliot second. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You're not allowed to be proud of me," I said. "You meant to say it's not entirely bad." "I am not going to say that about the best dissertation proposal in the cohort," she said. "How do you know it's the best?" "I've read them," she said. Which was technically true since as a teaching assistant she'd seen the assessment documents. "Yours is the best. And I'm proud of you. Get used to it." I got used to it. I got used to all of it, the love and the difficulty and the joy and the work of it. The daily accumulated reality of being chosen by someone and choosing them back. Nobody tells you what it actually feels like to love someone who is built by loss. I don't mean that dramatically. I mean it practically in the way that shapes daily life, the small textures of being with a person who learned early that the things you love can disappear without warning, and who therefore developed as a survival strategy the habit of not holding on too hard to anything. Elliot didn't cling. This was something I noticed in our first year together and spent considerable time trying to understand correctly, because it could look from certain angles like distance. Like she wasn't fully invested. Like she kept one foot slightly toward the door. But that wasn't it. It was more that she had learned not consciously, not by decision, but by the long, slow education of grief to love things while also being prepared for their absence. To hold things with open hands. This was, in some ways, beautiful. She was not possessive. She was not jealous in the corrosive way that some people are, the way that reads as love but is actually fear wearing love's clothing. She trusted me with a thoroughness that I found initially startling and eventually understood as the deepest kind of compliment, because for someone who had learned to prepare for loss, choosing to fully trust was an act of tremendous courage, but it also meant that I sometimes had to ask directly for the reassurance that other partners might have offered unprompted. Had to learn to say, "I need you to tell me we're okay," rather than waiting for her to intuit that I needed to hear it. Had to understand that her not saying certain things didn't mean she wasn't feeling. Then it meant she hadn't yet learned to translate feeling into language in the specific way those things required. We had a conversation about this in our second year. One of those conversations that you don't plan, and that arrive at exactly the right time because something has been building toward them for long enough that it needs somewhere to go. It was a Sunday in February. Gray and wet outside, both of us in the flat. She was reading at her desk, not working on the dissertation, just reading, which she did for pleasure in a way that was distinct from her working read, slower and less annotated. I was on the sofa failing to concentrate on anything because I'd had a difficult week and needed something I couldn't quite name. I said, eventually, "Can I ask you something?" She looked up from her book. The question in my voice had been enough to shift her attention fully. "Do you ever worry?" I said. "About us?" "Not about anything specific. Just in general. Do you ever have the 4 a.m. kind of worry?" She was quiet for a moment. The honest, thoughtful quiet, not the defensive quiet. "Not in the way you might mean," she said. "I don't worry that you'll leave or that something will go wrong between us because of something I can see coming." She set her book down. "I worry about the things I can't see. The arbitrary things." She looked at me steadily. "I worry because I know how much can be lost without warning. And I have more to lose now than I've had in a long time." I understood in that moment what I had been needing to hear, not reassurance exactly, but truth. Evidence that she was here, fully here, invested in the full weight of what we had. "I have more to lose too," I said. "Yes," she said. "I know. I'm sorry, I don't always say the things that would tell you that clearly enough. You don't have to be sorry. You just have to try." "I do try," she said. And then, after a pause, "I love you. Actively and consciously, and more than I knew I was capable of loving anyone. I need you to know that." I know it, I said. I just sometimes need to hear it. Then I'll say it more, she said, simply, without defensiveness. Just, here's what you need. I will do that. This is what I mean when I say she was worth it. Not in spite of the difficulty of loving her, but partly because of it, because the difficulty was inseparable from the depth. Because the things that made her hard to reach were the same things that made reaching her mean something extraordinary. In our second year together, Finn announced he was engaged. His partner was a man named Rory, a musician from Dundee who had the easygoing warmth that Finn also had and who looked at Finn with an expression of uncomplicated adoration that made everyone around them feel quietly optimistic about the human race. The engagement party was held in a pub in the new town. Half the literature department came. I arrived with Elliot, which still felt not startling exactly, but notable in the way that good things continue to feel notable when you're aware that you might easily have missed them. Finn hugged me with the enthusiasm of a man who had been watching a situation develop for nearly 2 years and was delighted by how it had resolved. Then he shook Elliot's hand with a slightly more measured quality, because he respected her in the way students respect teaching assistants who have made them work harder than they wanted to. She shook his hand back with the small, genuine smile she had, the one that was different from the polite professional one, and said she was glad for him. Over the course of the evening, I watched her navigate a social gathering in a new way. Not the way she navigated the departmental Christmas social, carefully, minimally, as though conserving something. She was more present, still reserved, still herself, but less armored, less managed. She talked to Deepa for 20 minutes about Scottish Gothic literature, and I heard her laugh once from across the room. She sat beside me without the careful professional distance that had once governed our proximity, and it was unremarkable. Which was remarkable. Later, Finn found me at the bar. She's different, he said. She's the same, I said. You're seeing more of it. He considered this. When you first told me about her, I was worried. I know you were. The cold thing, the paper thing. The way she made you feel in the first semester. He looked at her across the room. I thought that kind of cold doesn't warm up. Or when it does, it's just suppressed, waiting to come back. And now? Now I think I was wrong. He picked up his drink. Some people are cold because that's who they are. And some people are cold because they got very good at protecting something warm. And the difference matters enormously. Yes, I said. It does. You saw it early, he said. Before she showed it to you. Before she knew she was showing it. I thought about the library at midnight, the sound of something being slammed. The way she pressed her hands over her face, and I had made an inadvisable decision to ask if she was all right. I thought about how that had been the first crack. And how cracks aren't damage but entry points, places where something new can get in. I think I recognized something, I said. I think we recognized each other. He raised his glass. To recognition, he said. To recognition. I said, I want to tell you about the hard season because this is a true story and true stories include the hard seasons, and I think the hard seasons are actually where love proves itself. Or DOESN single quotes T. In our second year. There was a period of about 3 months from late January through early April when we were both struggling. And struggling in ways that didn't easily complement each other. My dissertation was at the point that dissertations reach where the initial excitement of the project has fully worn off and what remains is the enormous middle distance. The chapters that need to be written and revised and written again. The daily discipline of producing pages when you don't feel like producing pages. The specific exhaustion of sustained intellectual effort. I was also, for complicated personal reasons I'll come to in a moment, going through something emotionally that was draining me in ways that made the work harder. She was in the final stretch of the dissertation, which sounds like it should feel triumphant and mostly felt like being in a very long tunnel with a light at the end that occasionally got farther away. Her supervisor had raised a new concern about the conclusion chapter. There was a conference at which her paper had received a challenging response from an established scholar whose view of the field directly conflicted with hers. She was sleeping badly. When two people who both tend to go inward under pressure are both under pressure at the same time, the risk is that they go inward separately and forget to go toward each other. This is what happened. For several weeks, we were together, physically together, in the flat, eating meals. Sleeping in the same bed, but operating in parallel rather than in connection. Each of us managing our own difficulty privately. Each of us too tired to have the energy to fully show up for the other. I'd ask how her work was going and she'd give me a one-word answer and I'd nod and go back to my own laptop. She'd see I was stressed and make me tea without asking what was wrong because I'd have said nothing if she had thought it was not dramatic. That was the thing about it, the distance was quiet and gradual and felt week by week like not much. And then one night I woke up at 3 in the morning and lay in the dark listening to her breathe and felt with sudden clarity that we had been somewhere other than fully present with each other for a month. I lay there for a while. Then I said, quietly, not sure if she was awake, "Are we all right?" A pause. Then, I don't know. She was awake. We lay in the dark for a moment. I could feel the shape of the gap between us, not physical but the other kind, the kind that grows when people stop speaking the things they most need to say. "I've been scared," I said. "I haven't been telling you." "About my mother." She turned toward me in the dark. "What about her?" In December, my mother had been to the doctor with what turned out to be a treatable but significant thyroid condition. She was fine, would be fine, was being treated, was not in danger. But the weeks between the first appointment and the diagnosis and the start of treatment had been weeks of quiet fear for me. And I had somehow absorbed that fear privately rather than sharing it. Because Elliot was busy and her own mother had a heart condition and it seemed not the right time, not fair. Not my thing to bring into a space that already felt full. I told her all of this. She listened in the way she listened completely. Without interrupting. "Zara," she said, when I'd finished. "This is exactly the thing you were supposed to tell me. You were so busy. I am always busy. You are always going to be too aware of my busyness." Her voice was firm but not unkind. "I need you to tell me the important things regardless of what I'm busy with. That is not a burden, that is what this is." "I know," I said. "Do you?" I thought about it honestly. "I'm still learning to ask for things," I said. "Still learning to believe that asking doesn't." I stopped. "I've been quiet for so long. About so many things. It's a habit that's deep." "I know," she said. "And I'm the same. Which means we have to be more deliberate about it. Both of us." A pause. "I should have asked. I saw you were stressed and I told myself it was the dissertation and made you tea instead of asking. That was me choosing the easier option." "The tea was good," I said. "The tea was avoidance," she said. "It was kind avoidance, but still, we lay there." "Tell me about your mother," she said. "All of it. From when you first found out." So I did. I told her all of it, the December call from my father. The strange suspended quality of the weeks of waiting for results. The relief of the diagnosis being treatable. The residual fear that had sat in me since then like a low-grade hum. She listened to all of it and asked questions and held my hand in the dark and was present in the full, unglamorous, entirely necessary way. Then she said, "I need to tell you something too." She told me about the conference. About the scholar who had challenged her paper, not the intellectual challenge, which she could handle, but the personal quality of it. The way the man had spoken to her in a way that was not quite dismissive but proximate to it. With the specific flavor of how established scholars sometimes speak to young women in their field. And how she had handled it professionally in the room and come home and felt, privately, something she'd found difficult to name. Which turned out, when she finally found the word for it, to be humiliation. Not because she was wrong, which she wasn't, but because she had been made to feel small by someone who had the institutional power to do so. And that feeling had stuck in a way she was ashamed to admit. I listened to all of it and held her, hand in the dark, and was present. This is what love actually looks like in the hard season. Lying in the dark at 3 in the morning, both finally saying the things you've been swallowing for weeks. Neither of you comfortable exactly, but both of you real. Understanding that closeness is not a state you achieve and then maintain effortlessly, it's something you choose. Repeatedly, sometimes when you're exhausted and least equipped to choose it. We were better after that. Not immediately better is not immediate, usually, but genuinely, sustainably better. We learned something that hard season about the specific gravity of silence between people who love each other. About how it can mean safety, but can also, if left too long, mean distance. and about the importance of knowing which one it is. In April of our second year, Elliot's mother had a cardiac episode. It was not a heart attack. The doctors were careful about that word. A significant arrhythmia requiring hospitalization, a procedure, a week in the hospital, and Inverness. It was manageable. It was also terrifying. Elliot found out by phone on a Wednesday morning. She called me from outside the building where she'd been teaching, and I could hear in her voice even before she told me what had happened the particular quality of someone who was holding something very large very carefully. I drove her to Inverness. I had barely driven since moving to Edinburgh, but I had a car, a small, elderly, occasionally unreliable car, and she didn't drive, and the train would have taken longer. And so I drove 4 hours on motorways and then on roads, through increasingly dramatic highland landscape while she sat beside me with her hands folded in her lap and was quiet. In the way she was quiet when the alternative was falling apart, she held together through the drive. Held together through the hospital, the particular anxiety of hospital corridors and the particular quality of seeing a parent in a hospital bed, diminished by the context of tubes and monitors. Her mother was awake, alert, already managing the situation with a finished practicality that was evidently the source of Elliot's own composed approach to difficulty. I sat with Elliot outside the room while the doctor spoke with her mother alone. And she leaned against the corridor wall and looked at the ceiling, and I took her hand and held it. "I'm afraid," she said. "I know," I said. "I've been afraid for 2 years. Since the diagnosis." She looked at me. "I became very good at not showing it. I know that too." "It's different when you love someone," she said, with a quality of discovery, as though she'd arrived at something she'd known theoretically but was now understanding from inside. When you love someone, the fear is proportionate to the love, and the love is enormous. So the fear is. She stopped. "Yes," I said. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to. I was 15 when my father died. I thought I had learned how to exist in proximity to loss, but I had just learned to be alone with it." "You're not alone with it," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. "No," she said. "I'm not." Her mother recovered well. The procedure was successful. A week later, we drove back to Edinburgh with her in the car I drove. Elliot sat in the back with her mother, and I listened to them talking quietly in the front seat mirror. Mother and daughter in the way of mothers and daughters who love each other across a language barrier of different vocabularies, finding each other in the small specificities. Her mother stayed with us for a fortnight. This was the longest I had been continuously in close proximity to Elliot's mother, and it was, in many ways, more revealing than any conversation. I learned her in the small things, her habit of waking early and sitting in the kitchen with tea, the way she read in Finnish always, even decades after moving to Scotland, the way she spoke to Elliot with a mixture of pride and worry that was thoroughly maternal regardless of cultural context. One morning, I came into the kitchen early and found her already there, and we sat together over tea in the quiet, and she said to me, not as introduction to anything, just as statement, "She's better since you." I wasn't sure what to say. She was always, she paused, searching for the right English. Closed, like a house with the shutters down. Not nappe, not but separate. From things. From people. She looked at me. "You opened something. I saw it when she brought you for the first time." Something in her face. "She opened herself," I said. "I just was there." She shook her head. "It is not so simple. The right person in the right moment is not so simple." She drank her tea. "My husband Elliot's father, he was the same type. Close until you found the key. And then when he opened, he was the most generous person I knew." She looked out the window at the Edinburgh morning. I always hoped she would find someone who could find the key. I thought about the library at midnight. The sound of something slammed. The question, "Are you all right?" All the small choices that had led to this kitchen this morning. "She found herself, really," I said. "I was just paying attention." "Yes," her mother said. "That is what love is. Paying attention." The third year is the one that settled us. Not dramatically, not through a grand gesture or a single defining moment. Through the accumulation of ordinary time. Through the routine of 2 lives woven together. The daily evidence of what you are to each other. She finished the dissertation in October. The final submission was anticlimactic in the way of large endings. Suddenly, there was nothing to do. No next chapter to write, no argument to refine. And she stood in our flat holding the physical copy she'd had bound for the examination and looked slightly at a loss. I had put champagne in the fridge 2 weeks before, waiting. I opened it. We sat on the sofa and drank champagne, and she was quieter than I expected. Which I had expected. She processed major things slowly, quietly, often not visibly, letting them settle before they became feeling. How do you feel? I asked. Strange, she said. I've been writing this for 3 years. It's been the shape of every day for 3 years. You'll find a new shape, I know. She looked at the bound copy on the table. It's good work, she said. I know it's good work. That matters to me more than the outcome. The outcome is going to be good, I said. You don't know that. I've read every chapter, I said. I know that. She looked at me. You're biased. Completely. And right, she passed her Viva in December, which was the oral examination of the dissertation by 2 external examiners, a 5-hour process that I was not permitted to attend and which I spent in a coffee shop nearby reading the same page of a novel approximately 40 times. She texted me after, passed. Minor corrections. She's done. I was outside the building when she came out. She walked toward me and I could see it from across the street, the difference in her posture, something released. Something set down. She came to me and I put my arms around her and she held on in a way she didn't always. Tightly and for a long time, and I felt the 3 years of it in that embrace. The thousands of pages and the doubt and the late nights. And the chapter that wouldn't come right and the supervisor's comments and the Friday night in the library and all the long thread of it leading here. Done, I said. Done, she said. We walked home through the December Edinburgh evening, which was cold and clear and strung with lights. The Christmas decorations making the city beautiful in the particular way of northern cities in winter. The dark making the light mean more. She had started the postdoctoral position in Glasgow the previous autumn. The commute was manageable. The work was good, genuinely good, a fellowship that gave her time and resources to develop the dissertation into a book. She was I watched this happen over the course of that 3rd year, becoming more settled in her professional self. The work beginning to speak for itself rather than needing to be defended. The intellectual confidence was always there but was becoming something warmer. Less armored, she was starting to enjoy it, not just pursue it. I was in the final year of my doctorate. My argument, which had evolved considerably from the original proposal and was now a study of how post-colonial British literature uses form as a mode of cultural negotiation, was finding its final shape. Eliot read chapters and gave me the unvarnished feedback she gave everything. And I trusted it completely because I had 3 years of evidence that her rigor was in service of accuracy rather than unkindness. We had, by then, settled into the particular rhythms of a life that works. The rhythms are not exciting to describe. They are the rhythms of grocery shopping and Sunday mornings and the management of 2 academic schedules and cooking dinner on rotation and arguing occasionally about small things and resolving those arguments because we had both learned that being understood mattered. More than being right. We had Friday nights that were our specifically dinner and something cultural. A reading or a film or sometimes just walking through the city. She had, over 3 years, developed specific favorites in Edinburgh, a particular walk along the canal, a bookshop on Clark Street, a coffee place in Stockbridge that she maintained served the best espresso in the city. These were the small geographies of a life lived together. The places that became part of a shared vocabulary. My mother came to Edinburgh in the spring and stayed for a week, sleeping in our spare room, filling the flat with the particular energy of my mother in full domestic mode. She and Eliot had developed, over time, a relationship that worked on its own terms, my mother's warmth meeting Eliot's precision and finding, between them, a register that was specific to the 2 of them. My mother showed love through feeding. Eliot received this love with genuine appreciation and the small attentive acts that were her own version, remembering my mother's tea preference, noting the book she mentioned and sourcing one she hadn't mentioned she was looking for, the last evening of my mother's visit. After dinner, she and I were washing up while Eliot worked at the desk in the sitting room, and my mother said quietly, "She's a good person." "Yes," I said. She is not easy, she said. But she is a good person. And she loves you very carefully. She looked at me. It is a particular kind of love, the careful kind. The kind that pays attention. Yes, I said. It is. Your father thinks so too, she said. He doesn't say much, but he thinks so. I thought about how far we had come from the cautious early weeks of my parents knowing, from the slightly strained conversations and the careful distance. We had traveled here through patience and small steps and the repeated choosing of honesty over comfort. Mama, I said. Thank you. For what? She said. For coming through it the way you did. Both of you. She made a sound that was dismissive but also full of feeling. You are my daughter, she said. What else would we do? I want to tell you about this correctly because it is easy to tell it incorrectly. To make it into a moment of grand romance and skip the truth of how it arrived. The truth of how it arrived is this. In the spring of our 3rd year, we were walking on Calton Hill on a clear evening, the kind of evening Edinburgh occasionally produced like a gift. The whole city golden below us, the Firth of Forth in the distance. Arthur's Seat on one side and the new town on the other. We walked in comfortable silence. We had been talking about something, I don't remember what, some work thing. Some small topic, and then the conversation had lapsed into the silence that was simply being together. And we were standing at a point near the top where the view opened up fully, she said. I want to marry you. She said it the way she said everything that cost her something. Simply, directly, without the scaffold of romance around it. Without careful setup, without the formality that the statement perhaps invited. Just, I want to marry you. I turned to look at her. She was looking at the view rather than at me. Which I understood was her version of looking at me the way she sometimes said the most important things to a point in the middle distance because direct eye contact at certain moments was too much exposure even now. Not as a performance, she said. Not for anyone else. I want to marry you because I want the declaration. The formal one. I want to have said it formally, to have it be real in that way. Why now? I said not as a challenge, but because I wanted to understand. She was quiet for a moment. Because I've been thinking about the book, she said. About the dissertation becoming a book. About the kind of life I want to be building. She paused. I spent a long time building things that were mine alone. And it was the right thing for that time. But this is a different time. She looked at me finally. I want to build things with you. I want the fact of our life together to be named. I thought about a library at midnight. A cup of terrible coffee. A question, are you all right, that I had almost not asked. Yes, I said. She looked at me. Yes, I said again. Of course. Something happened to her face that I will spend the rest of my life being glad I saw. Not dramatic, just the private, real thing. A happiness so genuine it couldn't be composed into anything other than what it was. She took my hand. We stood there on Calton Hill while the evening light came across Edinburgh below us. Golden and long and generous, and we were very quiet together. Which was its own kind of saying everything. We were married the following spring. Not a large wedding. We were not large wedding people. 25 people, my parents and my sister and 2 of my aunts who had come through to Joy after the initial difficulty. Her mother and 2 friends of her mother's from Inverness. Finn and Rory, who were by then married themselves, Deepa. Several of our closest colleagues and friends. The ceremony was at a small register office, and the celebration afterward was at a restaurant near the Meadows where we had eaten on our 1st year anniversary. There were flowers because my mother had insisted on flowers and because Elliot had, surprisingly. No objection to them. She had told me once that she found flowers aesthetically defensible as long as they were simple. And my mother had respected this in her own way by choosing white tulips, which are the most architecturally honest flower. Elliot wore a dark suit. She looked like herself at highest resolution, sharp and precise and entirely at ease, which was not always how she looked in formal situations and which told me everything about where she was. I wore a dress my sister had helped me find, the color of old gold. And when Elliot saw me come in, she had an expression on her face that I recognized as the expression she wore when she encountered something that was more than she had prepared for. I keep that. I will always keep that. We said our vows. The register office's vows are functional and a little bare, which suited us. Neither of us had wanted the elaborate script, the performed profundity. What I remember is not the precise words, but the quality of her attention when I said mine. The way she heard them as carefully as she heard everything. Afterward, in the restaurant, Finn made a speech that managed to be funny and true in equal measure, recounting the early seminar days from his observer's perspective. The not entirely wrong moment, the Christmas social. With the particular gift of someone who had watched it all from the beginning and loved us both. Her mother made a short speech in English. That became Finnish halfway through, which the room received with the warmth that a mother's love requires no translation for. My mother did not make a speech. She held my hand very tightly at the table for a long time. And that was the speech. At the end of the evening, Elliot and I walked home through the Edinburgh night, our city by now. The place we had found each other and grown up in together. We walked the way we always walked, talking, her hand in mine, the city familiar and beloved around us. "Hello, wife," I said. She considered this. The corner of her mouth did the thing it did. "Hello, wife," she said. We walked home. This is the part of the story that doesn't really end. Because it's not finished yet, we are in it. We are living it right now, the ongoing, unglamorous, beautiful business of two lives in shared motion. She published the book. Elliot's book, her dissertation, made into a scholarly monograph, with a very good press, was published in the autumn after our marriage. The reviews were strong. The particular scholar who had spoken to her dismissively at that conference reviewed it briefly in a journal and said the argument was provocative in the tone of someone who respected something they'd rather not. She showed me this review and I said provoked into honesty is the best you can hope for from that man, and she laughed in the full, unguarded way. I defended my doctorate in the summer. My examiners said the argument made a genuine and original contribution to the field of post-colonial literary studies. Elliot was waiting outside the room, and when I came out and told her, she took my face in her hands, both hands. The way she did when something mattered enough to require both, and kissed me. We are both now academics in the full sense, with her postdoctoral fellowship becoming a lectureship. Me with a research position that has come through after the doctorate. We navigate the particular world of academia, which has its own pressures and peculiarities and ongoing challenges, together. We talk about work the way we have always talked about it, seriously and honestly, which means we can help each other in the specific ways that matter. My family and I are deeply close, in ways that feel richer for having gone through the work of becoming so. My mother speaks to me twice a week. She speaks to Elliot once a week. This is my mother's way of saying that Elliot is family now, has been absorbed into the circle of people she calls regularly, which is perhaps the most complete form of acceptance my mother has to offer. Elliot's mother visits more than she used to. The health scares have passed. She is managed and monitored and doing well, living her life in Inverness with a community of friends and her Finnish books and the Highland landscape she has loved for 40 years. When she visits us, she and Elliot have a different relationship than they used to. Something has opened. The same thing that opened in Elliot generally, and they talk now with more ease, finding the language they share. Finn and Rory moved to Glasgow, which put them closer to Elliot's institution than to mine, which Finn found deeply funny. The universe has aligned me with the more intimidating of the pair of you, he told her when he realized. She told him she didn't find that description accurate. He said that was exactly what an intimidating person would say. She genuinely likes him, I think. She would phrase it differently, would say she finds him intellectually honest, and better read than his cheerful exterior might suggest. Which is Elliot, for I like him, but it amounts to the same. 3 years have passed since that first Thursday seminar where Elliot Voss looked around the room with professional disinterest and said, "See you Thursday," and left. She finished her PhD, her dissertation, the argument about sensation, fiction and effect management, and the cultural technology of feeling was examined and passed, with only minor corrections. The external examiner, who was one of the most respected Victorian scholars in the UK, wrote in her report that the work made a substantial and original contribution to the field. Elliot read me that line 3 times because it was the specific phrase that her supervisor had told her she needed to earn. And she has earned it. She has a postdoctoral position now, at a university in Glasgow, a 1-hour train ride from Edinburgh. We have a flat in Edinburgh that is ours, books organized in a system that makes sense to both of us eventually. because we spent a weekend negotiating it and she commutes 3 days a week and works from home the other 2. And I am finishing my doctorate and teaching my own tutorials now. And our life together is exactly as complicated and imperfect and rich as you would expect from 2 people who are not easy but are worth it. Came out to my extended family last year. Not all at once incrementally, in conversations, some harder than others. My parents were by then practiced in it and gently present during the harder conversations. There was grief in some places, and there was joy in others, and there was the predictable range of human response. My mother's sister, whom I adore, cried and then hugged me for a long time and then asked when she could meet. Elliot, my father's brother, said very little for several months and then called one evening and said that he'd been thinking and that I was his niece. And that was the whole of what mattered. Elliot met them all eventually. She's who she is. She does not perform warmth. She doesn't feel, but people learn to trust her. Because she's consistent and she keeps her word and she pays attention in a way that people feel even if they can't quite name it. I think about who I was when I arrived in Edinburgh, careful and contained and quietly afraid of the version of myself I hadn't yet given myself permission to be. I think about sitting in that seminar room looking at the tall windows and not knowing that the thing about to unsettle me most was the cold, precise, brilliant, secretly tender person who was also, in ways neither of us understood yet, looking for the same thing I was. I think about what I want you to know, if you're listening to this story. That love can begin in cold places. But the person who is hardest to reach is sometimes the one who, when you reach them, shows you something about depth and permanence that the easily warm never quite do. That coming into yourself, into the truth of who you are, what you want. Who you love is not a single moment, but a series of choices. Some large and some small, some terrifying and some quiet. Each one building on the last, that you can be gay and uncertain, and afraid of the names for things and still find your way to yourself. That the right time to be who you are is the time you make. That it is worth it. All of it. The library at midnight and the cold seminar room and the kitchen tea and the walk in the rain and the August steps and the October hills and the daily, unglamorous, entirely extraordinary practice of choosing the same person. Over and over in all the ordinary moments that make up a life, she was cold to me. She was, for a while, something close to cruel, in the precise and pointed way of someone who defends themselves by maintaining distance. And then, in a library on a Friday night in November, something cracked, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in the way that ice cracks in spring, gradually and then suddenly, quietly and then completely, and then she kissed me on a London doorstep in August and said I love you in the simple, unadorned way she said everything that cost her something, and I understood. Finally, that the cold had never been who she was. It was just the thing she'd wrapped around who she was, while she waited to feel safe enough to let it go. I am the person she let it go with. I don't think anything in my life will ever feel as much like a gift as that.